welcome to another episode of the MyData Zurich webinar. Today with our guest speaker Damian Page about real-world data in the healthcare sector from a pharmaceutical perspective. But before we hand over to Damian, I'd like to say a few words about MyData. MyData is a non-profit organization with a focus on personal data. And as you might be aware, personal data is everywhere. Today, the focus is on health data. And here come my usual fun slides, just to give you an indication why we are focusing on these items. So at the beginning of IT, there was a little bit of chaotic situation about the data. More or less everybody was talking to everybody. I call that the data stone age, and it was pretty uncoordinated. Then we had this stage when the big techs came in and were running everything on their big servers. So from the fun point, this is the data middle age, and the objective of MyData is to have a human-centric approach. And this is particularly relevant for healthcare data, where if you think about it, the citizens want to have their data at their fingertips. And today we have a lot of silos, so that's where we want to go. And MyData is contributing in quite a few ways. I'm not mentioning all of them, but the most important one are MyData operators. And these are sort of fiduciaries of the personal data, because if you think about it, you can save your PDF files which you receive from your practitioner. But if the data is getting more structured, you need databases or more technical installations, then it's getting increasingly difficult. So you need somebody who takes care of your data on your behalf. And that's basically what the MyData operators is. There's a lot of additional things. I don't go into the details here. For those who are interested, you find it under the link, which you can find on the slides. Then one thing which I would like to point out, the MyData organization is running an annual conference, which takes place end of May, beginning of June. So it's 31st of May and 1st of June in Helsinki. Last year I have been attending. I have to say it's a very interesting community, lots of activities. Unfortunately, this time I won't be able to make it. But for those of you who are interested, you're welcome to have a look and possibly to attend. Then MyData has hubs in various locations, and we are the MyData Zurich hub. That's basically André Gollier, who's the president of the Swiss Data Alliance, Jonas Bertschi, who is the managing director, and myself. In Switzerland, we have shared that a little bit. Other countries have different approaches. In Switzerland, the Swiss Data Alliance is more the policy-making organization, and we are more focusing on hands-on and on practical topics. And with that, I'd like to show you where you can reach us. We are mostly on LinkedIn, so we are a LinkedIn company. We have actually two channels, one which is more person-centric and one which is more centric for local data ecosystems or open government data. We have also a YouTube channel, so most of our activities are recorded and you can access it. As we have a number of topics, we also have playlists, so you can find it along the playlists within the YouTube channel. If you would like to be notified, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and you can follow us on LinkedIn. And whenever we publish new events, then you will get a notification. We have various events. So right now we have one in the queue. So usually I'm contacting my interesting partners and we have more to come. So the one which is currently scheduled is about city sandboxing with Kaiser Wendt from the Tallinn University. So they have a very interesting project there and she's going to tell us about this project. We have a few things in the pipeline as we can do it. We are doing data literacy webinars. We had one recently, and whenever we have a chance, we'll bring more. Then we are occasionally cooperating with SAR, so sometimes we have events together with them. And we are on the self-sovereign identity activities, particularly on digital billing. I have a loose contact, which I am currently talking to. So stay tuned for more to come. You find it on LinkedIn. And of course, you can also become a member. The simple thing is, without any obligation, you can sign the declaration of the MyData principles. As of today, we have almost 1,500 organizations and individuals. Doesn't cost you anything, it just demonstrates your support. And of course, you can become a member. So there's a small membership fee and you are supporting the activities of the organization. With that, I'm already with the program. After my short intro speech, we have about half an hour from Damian about the very interesting topic of big data in the healthcare and pharmaceutical section. Then we have time for about half an hour discussion. And with that, I hand over to Damian, who is our guest speaker. So he's coming from Roche and he's taking care about the healthcare data ecosystem, which is an increasingly important topic.
And I want to really take the opportunity at the very beginning to thank you again, Pete, for the kind invitation and also the introduction now. I want to thank you all who have joined here in the late hour to join this very important topic for us as a healthcare company, as a health system overall, which is to really how we actually use big data in health and medicine in order to actually do what has been there forever, creating patient value. This is really what it's all about. And with this, I have been, for myself, I've been the last 12 years with Roche. And Roche is a research-driven healthcare company. So for us, as a research-driven healthcare company, this topic is of highest interest because we believe that the responsible use of health data bears tremendous potential for better personalized medicine and care, for better health system efficiency, and also for better, more data-driven research and development. And so what I want to do today is really talk about the opportunities we see to create value for patients with big data in health and medicine, and what needs to happen in order to make it a reality in Switzerland. I really want to take us started here by just highlighting the sheer amount of data in medicine that is being generated by all of us every day. What we have is about 3/4 of digitally captured data of all that is actually placed somewhere in hospitals, which you can see here on the red box on the left side. And the volume of digital data that is captured every day in hospitals with all of us is expected to increase exponentially even more. The data here is quite outdated, so you can easily assume that we have even more. And this is mostly driven by very data-intense technologies such as imaging, sequencing, as you can see on the panel on the right. And in extremely simplified terms, all these are on or off. It's a 0, it's a 1. And when we look at what we have here, very technically, only digitally, things can get very, very technical. And this is not the intention for me today. What I want to do today is really what's highlighted on the next slide. And this is much more highlighting not so much the technical things, but what we see, how we can generate value. Value for patients, value for very, very analog situations in the world that we have every day, as you see here. You have a physician and you have a patient in front. And the big questions we want to discuss today also is how can we generate big data sets to create patient value? So you will see this picture throughout my talk, and its reminder, and it should remind us for what we talk about is actually analog life situations. What we want to do is use digital technology, use data science to create value for these very analog life situations. And so with this, we can see how I would like to structure my talk. We very briefly go into a bit of definition. What do we mean with a big data set? Once we know what we mean, we look into how can we generate these big data sets in a responsible, meaningful way. Once we have these big data sets, we want to see how can we use them to move from a static to a learning health system, because that's where we can really use this big data, and that's where a bit the moonshot ambition is also coming from. Once we have what we want to achieve, we want to see what needs to happen to make this a reality in Switzerland. so if we move to the very first and look at a little bit at the definition, we can have very general discussions. And so normally what you have is the big data generally refers to processing large amounts of digital information that is typically too vast to process by traditional means. So it has to be analyzed by machine learning, by data scientists in order to become meaningful, to get an understandable, meaningful information out of it. And surprisingly, actually, the term big data is used quite ubiquitously, but there's no universally accepted definition. So what you see quite often is the definition of these 3 V's, which is the first for volume, highlighting the high volume of data that is consisting or making a big data set. The second is actually velocity, which refers to the high velocity with which data is generated and transmitted. The third is variety, to describe the high number of data types, the high number of data sources that constitute a big data set. You will see that for medical data sets, in addition to the very general terms, a fourth V is added, which is veracity. For us, in medical, in healthcare, veracity is of utmost importance because medical data sets need to require high quality, need to have authentic quality, and need to be trustworthiness, because only then you can actually derive meaningful insights, to have information that is added to bring additional insights to very specific patient situations. And this is what's about. We can see that a kind of a definition that works quite well is really how can big data in health encompass high volume, high diversity, biological, clinical, environmental, fact and lifestyle information collected from single individuals to large actually data sets in order to have cohorts in relation to their health and wellness status at one or several points. And I think with this, we should be nicely set up now that we have a definition for the rest of the talk. We can see that the concept for medicine is actually not so new. It has been by one of the fathers of modern medicine, William Osler, has actually stated that if it was not about the great variability among individuals, medicine might as well be a science, not an art. What that means is actually nowadays with digital technology, with data science, we can, if we have the right approach, we can do much more by applying what has been there for a long time. We can use data science to have delivery and R&D of medicine in a much more personalized way than it has ever been before. This is what Roche stands for. This is what we are trying to do, modern R&D, using data technologies, using data science to add additional patient value. And so with this, we can go to the next section, which is how do we actually generate and use big data sets? I want to start us here to see, okay, where does this fit in? If we see big data sets as a new source of medical insights, with a first click, you will see what we have today. And when we talk about real world data, what we have is what you see here in the panel. Routine practice data, also what you've seen on the first slide. What you have there is a lot of data, but the way the data is present is by no means in a format, in a structured data set that creates any value right now. But what you have is more and more data that is generated. This data that's generated is typically only used for exactly one decision or for one analysis, for one therapy decision. It's not in data set that can be used for data science. So you may ask, where does evidence come from that drives medical advances? Because all the authentic, well-characterized medical evidence that we have today, to the largest extent, way over 90%, still comes from clinical studies. This is a very regulated environment where we do clinical studies, where patient consenting is very well described, where a a therapy, a procedure is characterized and actually afterwards allows you to have an additional new medical data point. This is also today the most important data that's needed for medical insight generation, clinical studies. You may ask now, so do we have any big data applications already that would actually lead to medical insights? And indeed, if you see also the starting point, our hospitals, especially in Switzerland, it's actually a very high level of data, of digital data being generated. But what these evidence on these digital data applications currently are, they are very isolated. You can see these as siloed applications of enormous amounts of digital data generated, and they are mostly normally there where you have an instrument, a device at the very beginning with a very data intense technology. What you have here as examples is sequencing technology, imaging technology. They produce a lot of data, and machine learning, artificial intelligence already now is used in order to create a very well-structured data set that allows the physician to have better treatment decision, better surgery, better application and delivery of science, but it's always very isolated. What we are interested really to advance the health system is how do we actually generate these type of data sets from real world data, from the routine practice. And this is what we're really focusing on now. This is this panel here to the right. And that's where very clearly in Switzerland, in many countries actually in the world, this is very much still a work in progress. Big data sets from routine practice would have enormous benefit because it's the basis to enable a learning healthcare system. It's the basis where we would actually have better health system efficiency. If we achieve that, we would be able to deliver more personalized care. And for us as a research-driven company, it's fundamental to actually have care delivery also done in a way that enables data-driven R&D. So for modern biomedical research that is data-driven, it's fundamental that we advance the whole health system in order to have data generated that can be used for data science applications also in R&D. Here, this is really how medical insights are generated today to advance medical sciences, medical research, medical delivery. And what we have is right now a disconnect between clinical research and routine practice. And the moonshot ambition, if you will, is really how do we move from a static into a learning? And that's what we can discuss now a little bit in the next chapter. Where and how can big data sets enable learning healthcare systems in order to really be able to capture the advantages of big data for modern medicine? We see this really from, first we can focus here on that it's surprisingly often the case where people say, it will cost us so much. But what is, of course, there would be upfront investments needed in order to move really from a static to a learning health system. But what is done if we manage as a society, we would have sustainable gain. It would be sustainable for the system, and it would also be financially sustainable. And here is a report from the ETH together with a consulting company, McKinsey, that have calculated the gains financially to 8.2 billion if we really had digital technology improvement done in a way that this can be captured. So this is this is a big number. It's about 10% of the healthcare spending in Switzerland. And as I said, the upfront investments would be paid off because what we can achieve as a society is really having better prevention, early diagnosis enabled by really having digitized healthcare as a society. There are ways to, that's something we are very interested in as well as a company. How can we move to much more value-based reimbursement models from actually just volume-based reimbursement. And last but not least, right now, a lot of spending is also from therapy use, which although there is an approval, it's for the individual not always upfront clear what is the treatment for, what is the chance for treatment success. By having the delivery of healthcare embedded in a healthcare system that's fully data enabled, a lot of this becomes possible, which is ultimately having better care, but much more health system efficiency with also financial gains. We can see big data sets continuously generated from two sides in the real world. On the one hand, you can imagine more and more data generated for one individual patient. And what you see here on this slide is an example from a research project that was done at the University of Zurich in collaboration with Roche. And here, for a cancer patient, for the way the diagnosis of the tumor was done, there was raw data generated up to half a terabyte for each individual patient. So you can imagine you have a massive amount of data, and the art afterwards is really to digest this information in order to make it in a very short time frame, insightful and meaningful for the physician to take a therapy decision. This is one way where you can see data being generated in a structured way, generating bigger and bigger information by really having much more data for one patient. The other trend is the other way around, that you have specific data points from many patients that enable you to take data sciences applied and technology applied in order to inform a better decision and the better for the healthcare system and the individual patient for the next. So you have these two ways, more and more data for one individual or structured data from many patients that ultimately always lead to the same thing. We do more with the data point, not just for the decision in the system that's done, but the data is structured such that it can be analyzed with machine learning, with data science technologies in order to get additional gain. And it's these two ways that really make it very obvious for all of us actually being involved in this field that the learnings and the gains are incredible, but it's extremely hard to get started. And it will be very interesting to discuss this later on as well. So what needs to happen to actually make it a reality in Switzerland? We want to go into this on the next few slides. Interestingly, actually, Switzerland is not that bad as we all always think. Switzerland is very fragmented, but it's a very well-funded system. What you have is here a very good startup scene. What you have is literacy of and the responsibility of the individuals. What we see is actually technology creates a lot of opportunities for data-driven healthcare. What we see as well is implementation is really, really challenging. But we see patients becoming more educated, more empowered. We also see there is an increased willingness in sharing and accessing health data if it's very clear and transparent what is happening. And that's a very fair request. We need to have much more transparency there. What we see is novel technologies are increasingly used to track and monitor health. What is lacking completely is that this is done in a structured way, that we have what I showed before, that what we are doing now is happening in many silos, but is not happening in a coordinated way. So even research organizations, they gain new tools, but the way to generate real world insights that can be immediately used in disease management, but what I've shown now on these first two slides, we are actually nowhere in Switzerland. And that's a real shame. The next thing is also the ability to harness and utilize health data. It is actually improving, but can we integrate it into health data to use decision making? Very far away. We have, and we are also very happy as a company. We have very good partnerships with academia. there is interest to working together. But what we do see an enormous lag is that policymakers are not yet on the level to really understand, and that we have a common understanding. And I'll probably even my talk here, I probably failed to take people along, but we are too far away in this country to actually talk about the same thing. So there is a genuine interest, and it has definitely changed also during the last few years during Corona. There is a perceived more interest, but so far we haven't really moved far, although technology would create this opportunity to have a much more data-driven healthcare in Switzerland. Again, we need a little bit this moonshot approach. Yes, we will talk what's the next stop, but what we need is really, what is the big ambition? What type of health system do we have? Do we continue to have this completely separate, on the one hand, research, on the one hand, routine practice, although we have so many insights that it's actually coming all together. Digital technology has generated a situation where clinical research, routine practice is more and more embedded into each other. But what we have is clinical processes completely separate when you are either clinical research or routine practice. So we have something that is going more and more hand in hand, and we need to really have a mindset shift in the country to say, yes, this is where we want to go. Are we all clear on that? What do we need to now do first as a first step? And we have small examples that this is possible, but unless we have really the vision together, it's extremely challenging to set up a system where exchange of data and value and insight between research and routine practice enables a continuous learning system with continuous evidence generation for better patient care, better health system efficiency, and fundamental for us, better R&D. This is the vision. What are important factors to actually get this going? And here, we are everyone, also us, I don't exclude the pharmaceutical industry. Everyone is actually somewhere in a silo. But what really changes if we all put the patient in the center and say, okay, what do we want to achieve for the patient, for the health system? Things actually get very quickly better. So this is fundamental. We need everyone working together in multi-stakeholder collaborations, but we have to balance our own agenda and really put this back and put the patient in the front. Then it actually will work. Again, once we have this set up, the mindset and the political will has to be there to enable a health system change. And then the other are technical things where you will ask around, everyone will tell you the answers. It's common data standards, it's incentivizing for structured, high quality data. And as I maybe showed not carefully enough before, the primary data is key. You need to invest in primary data collection in order to use it meaningfully for secondary use. If the primary data collection is not authentic, trustworthy, you cannot do anything in secondary use. So the investment needs to go into primary data collection, and we need to balance how much do we want to collect versus what is meaningful, because we do not just want to collect as a society everything, because data collection, structured data collection costs money. All of this sounds easy. We only achieve it to really have political will there changed if we all speak with one voice. This is hard, even from pharma company A to pharma company B, from health insurer A to health insurer B, but it is absolutely possible if we all have the same moonshot ambition. And so with this, I want to highlight what needs to happen. And I'll be short in this, but I will always be an unfailing optimist. And I'm absolutely, Switzerland is perfect to actually make it happen. But we need to have the moonshot vision. We need to invest in infrastructure and really the right incentives. It doesn't cost more, but we need to incentivize what makes sense and no longer pay what doesn't make sense. all of this actually only works if we focus on being trustful, and that requires the speaking with one voice. What I like in this country is you don't, I have talked a lot about patient, but we can only turn the vision into reality if we see this not as a healthcare issue, but actually a societal issue. It's affecting much more healthy patients or healthy people than patients. It affects all of us. So we need to build the trust in order to also win political campaigns. This will only work with transparency and having clarity on how can we consent people, how have we clarity on secondary data use. With this hand in hand is actually the other thing that's very clear that needs to happen to make it a reality. Access to data needs to be regulated to ensure two things. On the one hand, it needs to add value, not just for one stakeholder, but really for the entirety of society. And access in a regulated fashion also has to secure privacy for the individual. But with all of this, I am absolutely having no doubt that in Switzerland is in a perfect position to make this a reality if we really see it as a societal challenge that we all want to address together. And with this, I very much thank you for your attention and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Damian. Really very interesting thoughts. I have tons of ideas, and I'll quickly jump into it. Actually, the first point which you brought up was that we are in a good situation in Switzerland. So everybody's complaining. Maybe that's a little bit part of the Swiss culture. They see sometimes more the problems than the opportunities. And indeed, there are tons and tons and tons of data. If you think about other countries which do not have the technical infrastructure, don't have the equipment or the machines or the server, they don't have the data at all. But you pointed it out, it's all very siloed. And I want to quickly mention a podcast which I was listening to recently. It was a Swiss person, so he knew the Swiss system, who is currently practicing in Sweden, somewhere in the healthcare sector. And interestingly, in Sweden, everything is very transparent. I do not know so much about the actual treatments, but very much about the statistics around it. So I think if we want to do that, we could do that quite quickly and easily in Switzerland. It's possibly more a cultural issue than an issue of being able to do it. And one thing which I would like to mention, coincidentally, earlier today, I was attending a workshop where we discussed exactly that. So what you brought up in your speech is we were thinking back and forth. So everybody agrees where the problems are, but how can we solve it? And I would like to come to the last point on this very last slide, the regulate data access. Yes, we need regulation, but the point which I would like to make, we also need some freedom to experiment. And if you think about the electronic health record, the famous EPD in Switzerland, they are working on it for 15 years now. And most people agree there is no real value so far. So it's an expensive exercise. And I think it was possibly way too sequential. So we certainly need the regulation, but we also need to try out things before we write it into law, because the lawmaking process is very slow. And if you wait until we have 100% or best Swiss practice, preferably 150%, then it takes for ages. So I think we need both. We need a clean regulation, but we also need the how shall I say that, the pioneer spirit to try out things where which are not yet fully regulated, but where we see the opportunities. So these are the things which come to my mind. And I would also like to hear what specific steps can we take to make this happen. So let's start with the standards. I think that's one thing in the meantime, everybody has agreed if you want to have interoperabilities, then we need to agree on standards. And we also need business models which are based on these standards. What are your thoughts on standards? How can we bring these standards forward? That's something which keeps me personally quite busy.
Well, thanks, Pete. I think the most important thing is not so much which standard, is it standard A or is it standard B, but that we agree on a standard. This is more important. And if we agree on a standard, once we will agree on a standard, we will obviously also check what do people around Switzerland do, so that we align the standard with others. What I think is much more important is that we really have a clarity on where do we want to go, because it's not like it's not a law per se or a standard per se that is, but what do we want to achieve with it? And in that sense, that's what actually would come to mind to both what I have here on the slide. Infrastructure, incentive, it needs to serve a purpose. And we haven't really had a discussion. What is our ambition for the healthcare system in Switzerland? How do we actually want to use technical advances? We are still very much behind there. We are completely losing the track of making the most with what the technical advances would actually allow. And this is much more important to have this mindset shift rather than which standard is it.
Let me quickly come back to the standards. I give you a specific example.
If you make, can I just, before you go to that, can I also just make a comment to what you were saying on regulation, because I don't think it is mutually exclusive to what I said. But here I'm probably coming very much from a pharma perspective, because I would not think of regulation as a law, but a regulation that allows to have actually transparency and also guarantee privacy, for example, if it comes to data. And so if you think of advances in pharmaceutical industry, it would actually not work without a regulator like Swissmedic, in our case, like the FDA in the US, where you have very, very clear regulation set. That's the fundamental approach in order to actually have clarity. I was more coming from this side, and that, if you see it this way, it will actually stimulate experimentation. It's not that I see regulation is just paralyzing everything. I see regulation as we need clear play rules. We need clarity on how can, within a clear common ground, really data privacy be protected. How can I make sure that if I give a data set, it's actually making value, not just for someone, but actually for society as a whole, and my data privacy is secured. So those are setting frameworks as society that afterwards enables you to have experimentation on a much more coordinated way towards a moonshot goal than what we are doing now, which is we want to experiment. Experiment is terrible if it's actually not if the experimental setup is not properly done. That's just a comment on where I don't think we were telling something different, but we came from very different angles.
Yeah, for the pharmaceutical sector, it's certainly important to have very clearly defined ground rules. That's indeed true. I'm looking at our famous national health record, and there, from my perspective, it was too sequential. So first of all, they wrote down the standards, or well, the legal regulations, to put it this way, and then at some point they started to implement it. And when it was finished with the implementation, or partially finished, they're still working on it actually, then they realized it's not going to work the way they wrote it down. And my counter example is the new EID, which is coming along. So what they are doing, they are on the one hand, they are writing the law, they are drafting the law actually, And in parallel, they are running experiments, technical experiments, prototyping. Actually, I'm going to be involved in that with a health solution, by the way. So I'm planning to implement the international patient summary on this platform. But the thing is, they have a parallel approach with this EID. And once the law passes all the necessary steps, then they plan to be ready on day one. And that's more or less the opposite what happened with the electronic health record. The point which I would like to make, if you make it too sequential, then it takes too much time. So we should do that in a little bit more parallel fashion. And I totally agree, specifically with health data, we definitely need standards how we treat health data. So that goes without saying, but we shouldn't stop ourselves from trying out certain things within these boundaries to keep a certain pace up. Otherwise, it's taking way too long.
Couldn't agree more to that. Absolutely.
And just to give a quick intro to Fabian, because Fabian is in the university hospital, and we were running some sort of prototyping activities pretty much in this area, if I'm right. And so Fabian is a medical doctor who is very interested in technology and in data. And about a year ago, we were experimenting, and actually, Fabian is the customer of such a system. As a medical doctor, he wants to use the data, and the main objective was, how shall we structure the data that medical doctors and not the technical nerds can work with the data? And finally, they decided to take a route. I think it's still experimental. Maybe Fabian, you can say something about that. They have to decide to go a route with open EHR, maybe you know that, open air as it's usually spelled. And coincidentally, I had lunch with the representatives from this company yesterday. So it's an open standard, but there is a commercial company behind it who makes it a little bit more a product. So that's what I remember. So maybe Fabian, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, so I mean, my motivation was mostly because I was working for 3 years now at building the data warehouse at the University Hospital.
At which one, if I may, Fabian? Nice
in
to
Basel.
Basel, okay.
Basel. I'm not from Basel, but I work in Basel. So, yeah, and so there we were confronted with, even when you're able to access the data, it's just not in a quality that serves analytical purposes, right? So, and then the next thinking was then, okay, then we have to change how we capture data, because we also had many tries how we tried NLP and stuff and tried to get more structured data out of free text, but that also did not work to quality standards that were actually wanted by researchers or clinicians or whoever was using the data. And coincidentally with that, the hospital is now deciding to get a new EHR system in hospital. And so that was all of it coming together with us experimenting with structured data capture based on open air, for example. That was like one candidate we selected for a prototype, together with an implementing company that makes the standard like to a product that's really better. And did you have lunch with them yesterday, Pete, or was it from
Yes,
Better, or
with Björn and was it Carsten from Better? Better is the company.
So, and now still the hospital is now still deciding how they want to design the specifications for the new EHR system, and then they try to acquire vendors that would fulfill these specifications. But it's still not through yet. So. But we kind of positioned the data aspect of an EHR much higher than it was initially done.
And a few more words. So we started out with FHIR standards. So, and unfortunately, in the healthcare sector, there are actually quite a number of pretty good standards. So FHIR is a collection of about 150 predefined resources, which you can take and which you can customize. So we were looking into that. Unfortunately, it's pretty technical. So that was one of our findings. This open air is a much better way of representing data from a physician's perspective. And that's actually one of the follow-up activities with Better. So we are evaluating these standards. But if you want to use a standard, you can take whatever is around. In other sectors, you still have to define the standards, but in the healthcare sector, there's actually quite a number of standards. And the interesting bit is this open air platform is used as a national health record in other countries. And it's more targeted towards storing data, making data persistent or permanent, instead of, as it's in FHIR, instead of exchange of data. So there are different approaches from that. So from what I'm hearing, this open air has quite some potential, and I have yet to understand how these two standards are some sort of compatible or whatever. And I guess you are right in the middle of that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit, it's like this classical innovation curve. So I'm a bit now on the downswing. I'm also a bit skeptical more, but the more I've worked with it, the more skeptical I became. Now, because also it's still hard to really make general interoperability even between hospitals, because now when you try to model a bit more complex use cases, it's still not so straightforward, or it's still not as standardized as you wish. But I still think it's the best thing that is around. And because you were asking about how it links with FHIR, I mean, better, they claim they have like, they call it FHIR Bridge, which should do that, but that's still very much in baby shoes, and it is very hard to do because FHIR is much more generic, and you still have to really do some hardcore data mapping between resources and OpenEHR concepts.
The other thing which I would like to mention, also with the University Hospital of Basel, you know, these are good friends of mine. We are running a master student's work about natural language processing. And the reason is today's physicians are trained to write reports. You can like it or not, but that's today's reality. And the whole past is represented in reports. And for several years to come, the physicians will still write reports. So we'll have to live with these reports. And one idea is to have an improved natural language processing with ontologies. So far, these were only trained models. And to train these models, you need tons and tons of data or reports, which you rarely get because it's very sensitive data. So we are running an experiment with natural language processing based on ontologies. And my dream situation would be, and that was also your point, Damian, to capture the data at the source. And the dream situation would be you have a clinical system. The physician can type his text as he's used to do it. In real time, he gets the structuring behind the scenes and is being reminded if certain things are ambiguous or incomplete. So to make sure that the data is captured consistently and completely at the beginning, because once the report is written and printed or stored, then you can't get hold of the author anymore. So to get it right at the beginning, so that's the idea behind it. I don't know how far we are getting. So the student was just about to start. We had a call just yesterday. So he is 1 month into his master thesis. He will work about a year on it. So let's see what the outcome will be.
Actually, and today I just read it announced that Epic, like this big EHR vendor from the United States, they are now getting into collaboration with Microsoft regarding GPT-4 implementation in the EHR. I'm really curious how that will work out, because so for all these NLP things that we try to use on the data, like self-developed stuff and also commercial products that are around, they were not that good. But I tried with GPT-4 now, basically feeding it reports and asking it questions about reports. Like basically I fed it like 10 reports and said, make me a table with each patient or each of these reports where you flag like yes, no, these findings. And it did that really, really well. I was really surprised. It's by far the best what I've seen so far. I think that can be super powerful when you have that right implemented right into the EHR.
Yeah, so we are getting there slowly. And on our call yesterday with Bram Stiltjes, we were discussing his favorite topic. It's about how do you enter this data. So we can do it in a written report as the physicians are used. Bram's dream situation is you have a 3D model of the anatomy model of the human being, and you basically can click on the organ, say that is the liver, and there we have this indication. And interestingly, based on his discussion, I found a project which is called Z Anatomy. It's an open source project, and you have the full anatomy of a human being as a 3D model. You can turn on and off your organs. So that's a more convenient way for the physicians to enter the data than just writing reports. To enter the data and also to display it. So it's sort of a digital twin. So the model is more the 3D model, but you can also add features like inflammations or things like that. You can demonstrate it and you can visualize it on the respective body parts. So possibly we're going to make a visualization of that one day.
Yeah, you mentioned the call yesterday from. So
the project is called Z Anatomy, as in Z Zulu-Anatomy, and it's an open source project, basically to visualize the anatomy in a way which is more feasible for physicians.
That was you had that discussion because of that master thesis, or why did you have that discussion about?
I brought it up because Bram, in an early interview, he mentioned the idea to have a digital twin, a visualized digital twin, and that's why I briefly mentioned it yesterday. Based on his discussion, I was doing a little bit of research. With that, we're actually running out of time already, and what we are typically doing is a short summary. Damian, would you like to try your summary?
What I've been trying to highlight here is really staying on a high level, that it's not so much data in itself. The digital world, it opens a lot of actually new ways to solve very analog problems, which is there's a physician and there's a patient. And if we manage to use digitalization and data science in healthcare, we have tremendous potential to have better, more personalized care, to have better health system efficiency, and for us as a research company, very important as well, we can have competitive, modern, data-driven biomedical research and development. We need that. In order to get there, we need to find a way how to generate and use continuously growing high-quality health data sets. This is what is required to realize the potential. We have so many different ideas. We can only realize the potential if we really focus on the patient, in order then to have a moonshot ambition where we want to bring our healthcare system to work together across interest groups, across different stakeholders, to achieve speaking with one voice and generate also a political will to advance the health system. I personally am an unfeigning optimist, and I think we can do better in Switzerland than what we have done so far. We can make a learning health system a clinical reality in Switzerland if we focus on infrastructure priorities, we set the right incentives. And here again, right incentives would mean we really need to incentivize primary data quality in order to use it for secondary use. And there is no way other than really working all together to gain the trust of each and every citizen, not just patients, each and every citizen. We can only do that if we work on having transparency and clarity on the data use. If we do all of this, I'm very optimistic that as a society, we can seize the opportunity of big data in health and medicine and make this a much more efficient and even cheaper system than we're running today. You know, I grew up in the Alps, and I'm a mountaineer, and you don't know where to go if you don't know where is actually, what peak do you want to go up. So the very first thing before to say where we want to be in 5 years, in 10 years, is we actually need to have a common understanding. Where do we want to go? We need to realize that what we're doing now is quite bad. Only the Americans pay more for health than we do. We can still afford to have a very inefficient system. And for me personally, this is actually a shame. So we need to have an ambition, and then you can very clearly map out what is step one to get there for a more efficient health system. a much higher ambition to really use digital technology to make more for patients, for health system efficiency. And if we want to continue being competitive in R&D in Switzerland, we actually need to change the system. And so thanks again, Pete, for the opportunity to present this here in MyData.
You're welcome. From my side also, Damian, thank you very much for taking the time for preparing the material and for presenting that on this platform. Thank you and see you next time.